Number 1. Eliza Fairchild Baker. When police found the prosthetic leg in the woods off Hudson Circle Road, they knew the truth. 10-year-old Zura Baker was already dead. Zura Claire Baker was born on November 16, 1999, in Wagga Wagga, Australia, a cheerful girl who survived bone cancer at age 5, lost part of her left leg, and still smiled through it all. She wore a bright pink prosthetic, loved reading mystery novels, and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. Despite her challenges, teachers at Hudson Elementary in Hickory, North Carolina, remembered her as resilient, polite, and always hopeful. In 2008, Zura's father, Adam Baker, met an American woman named Eliza Fairchild through an online dating site. Within months, they married. By September 2009, Adam and Zura moved from Australia to Hickory, North Carolina, settling into a modest rental house at 21 Christie Drive in the Gunpowder Creek subdivision. To neighbors, Eliza seemed caring, volunteering to homeschool Zura because of her special medical needs. She presented herself as the devoted stepmother every child deserved. But neighbors on Christie Drive noticed something troubling. Zura rarely played outside. The blinds stayed drawn. Patricia Lawson, who lived 3 doors down, later told investigators she never saw the little girl with the prosthetic leg after the first few months. It was like she disappeared, Lawson said. Teachers at Hudson Elementary called social services when Zura stopped attending school, but Eliza had already pulled her out, claiming homeschooling. Inside the home at 21 Christie Drive, behind locked doors and drawn curtains, Zura's nightmare had already begun. By early 2010, Eliza was isolating Zura completely. Court documents later revealed that Zura was confined to her second-floor bedroom, denied food for days at a time, and subjected to relentless emotional abuse. Her bedroom had no toys, no decorations, just a bare mattress on the floor. While Eliza and Adam's biological children ate regular meals downstairs, Zura was given scraps, if anything at all. Neighbors reported hearing arguments. Maria Chen, who lived next door, testified that she heard a woman screaming at a child on multiple occasions. "I heard things like 'you're worthless and no one wants you here,'" Chen said. "I should have called someone." When social workers from Catawba County Department of Social Services visited the home in July 2010 following an anonymous tip, Eliza lied smoothly, claiming Zura was visiting relatives in Australia. The social workers left satisfied. Zura was still locked upstairs. Medical records showed Zura missed critical cancer follow-up appointments. Eliza claimed she couldn't afford the co-pays. But investigators later discovered Eliza was spending money on herself, new clothes, dinners out, shopping sprees, while Zura went without basic necessities. The child who had fought so hard to survive cancer was now fighting for survival in her own home. Then on October 9, 2010, at approximately 5:30 a.m., Eliza Baker called 911 from 21 Christie Drive, reporting that Zura was missing. Hickory Police Department officers arrived within minutes. Eliza claimed Zura had been in her bedroom the night before but was gone when she checked that morning. But something didn't add up. A bizarre ransom note was found in the family's wood stove, demanding $1 million, but it didn't mention Zura. It demanded money from Adam's employer. Investigators immediately suspected the note was fake. Detective Tim Deal led the search. Within 24 hours, investigators discovered blood evidence in Zura's second-floor bedroom at 21 Christie Drive. They detected the smell of decomposition in 2 vehicles registered to the family, a white Chevrolet Tahoe and a Honda sedan. When questioned at the Hickory Police Department on North Center Street, Eliza's story changed repeatedly. First, she said Zura ran away. Then she claimed someone kidnapped her. Finally, on October 11, 2010, Eliza admitted the truth: Zura was dead. According to Eliza's confession to investigators, Zura had died days earlier. Instead of calling for help, Eliza claimed she panicked. But what came next shocked even veteran detectives. Eliza told police she dismembered Zura's body and scattered her remains across rural locations in Caldwell and Burke counties to hide the crime. Search teams spent weeks combing through wooded areas, roadsides, and fields. On October 23, 2010, searchers found Zura's bright pink prosthetic leg off Hudson Circle Road in Caldwell County. On November 14, 2010, parts of her remains were discovered in brush off Christie Road, just miles from where she once lived. The medical examiner confirmed the remains were Zura's, though the cause of death could not be determined due to the condition of the body. Investigators believed Zura died as a result of prolonged abuse and neglect. On September 15, 2011, in Courtroom 2 of the Catawba County Courthouse on South College Avenue in Newton, North Carolina, Eliza Fairchild Baker was formally charged with second-degree murder. Prosecutors presented evidence of sustained abuse, including medical neglect, isolation, starvation, and emotional torture. They argued that even if Zura died from illness, Eliza's refusal to get her medical care amounted to murder. On September 14, 2012, Eliza Baker pleaded guilty to second-degree murder as part of a plea agreement. On December 13, 2012, Judge Robert Irvin sentenced her to 15 to 18 years in prison at the Catawba County Courthouse. The courtroom gasped. Many felt the sentence was far too lenient for such a horrific crime. Zura's biological mother, Emily Dietrich, who had been fighting for custody from Australia, wept openly. Today, Eliza Baker is inmate number 1527085 at the Anson Correctional Institution in Polkton, North Carolina. She became eligible for parole in 2027, a fact that continues to outrage those who remember Zura. Adam Baker was never charged with his daughter's death, though he faced criticism for failing to protect her. He eventually returned to Australia. Zura Claire Baker is buried at Catawba Memorial Park in Hickory, North Carolina. A memorial garden was built in her honor at the corner of 16th Avenue Drive Northwest and 1st Street Northwest in Hickory, with a plaque that reads, Zura Claire Baker, she touched the hearts of many. The case led to reforms in North Carolina's child protective services, particularly around homeschooling oversight and medical neglect. To this day, Zura's story stands as a tragic reminder that abuse can hide in plain sight, and that children with disabilities are especially vulnerable. Number 2, Heather Lovell Caton. By the time police found the garbage bag in the Alabama woods, 3-year-old Chase DeBlase and 4-year-old Natalie DeBlase had been dead for months. Their stepmother had made sure of that. Chase and Natalie were bright, energetic children from a previous relationship of their father, John DeBlase. Chase was cheerful and curious, always asking questions. Natalie was shy but loved to dance and sing when she felt safe. Both children were too young to understand that the woman their father married would become their worst nightmare. Before Heather entered their lives, the children lived with their biological mother in Kentucky. They were happy, fed, and loved. In 2009, John DeBlase met Heather Lovell in Kentucky. She had struggled financially for years, jumping between jobs and relying on others to get by. When she met John, she saw an opportunity. The two began dating quickly, and soon Heather moved to Alabama with John and his children. They settled into a small house in Mobile. To casual observers, Heather seemed like a typical stepmother trying to adjust to family life. But behind closed doors, she was anything but typical. Within months, neighbors noticed the children stopped attending daycare. They were rarely seen playing outside. When they did appear, they looked thinner, quieter, and scared. Friends of the family said Heather had a controlling influence over John, manipulating him into mistreating his own children. She had him wrapped around her finger, one friend later testified. He stopped being the father those kids needed. By late 2009, the abuse had escalated into something systematic and cruel. Court records later revealed that Natalie and Chase were denied food for extended periods, forced to stand for hours as punishment, and tied with duct tape when they cried. They were locked in closets in the bathroom when Heather grew tired of their presence. The punishments were harsh and frequent. Wetting the bed meant hours standing in the corner. Asking for food meant being called ungrateful and being sent to isolation. Heather insisted it was discipline. John went along with it, either too afraid to stand up to her or too complicit to care. Prosecutors would later argue that Heather was the driving force, the architect of the abuse, while John was the weak enabler who should have protected his children but didn't. The first child to die was 4-year-old Natalie. In March 2010, after enduring months of severe abuse and malnutrition, Natalie's small body gave out. She died in the house. Instead of calling 911, instead of seeking help, Heather and John wrapped her body in a garbage bag and drove to a remote wooded area in southern Alabama. They dumped her body and left her there, alone in the dirt. They never reported her missing. They simply went home and continued their lives as if nothing had happened. Months passed. 3-year-old Chase was still alive, still suffering, still hoping someone would save him. But no one came. In June 2010, Chase followed his sister. He became too weak, too malnourished, too broken to survive. His body was also wrapped in a garbage bag. This time, John and Heather drove to Mississippi and abandoned his remains in a forest. Again, they reported nothing. The children's mother, who did not have custody, grew increasingly concerned when she could not reach her children. She called repeatedly. She left messages. She begged John to let her speak to them. He always had an excuse. In the fall of 2010, the children's mother contacted authorities. She told them something was wrong. She said she hadn't spoken to Chase or Natalie in months. Police began asking questions. When they questioned Heather and John, their stories didn't match. Inconsistencies piled up. Finally, under pressure, John broke. He admitted the children were gone. He led authorities to their remains. Investigators who responded to the scene said it was one of the most disturbing cases they had ever encountered. John de Blase was arrested and later sentenced to death for his role in the murders. But prosecutors made it clear, Heather was the mastermind. She was charged with capital murder, aggravated child abuse, and child endangerment. During her trial in 2014, prosecutors painted a picture of a cold, calculating woman who showed no remorse. Witnesses described her as emotionless when speaking about the children. She talked about them like they were objects, not human beings, one investigator testified. The jury heard evidence of systematic torture, starvation, confinement, and psychological abuse that spanned months. They heard about the garbage bags. They heard about the shallow graves. They heard about the lies and the cover-up. On August 7, 2014, Heather Lovell Caton was found guilty on all counts. The judge stated that the murders were especially cruel and calculated. She was sentenced to death, becoming the first woman in Alabama in decades to receive a death sentence for killing children. Today, Heather Lovell Caton remains on death row at the Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women in Wetumpka, Alabama. She continues to appeal her sentence, but all attempts so far have failed. The state maintains that her role was not passive, she was an active participant in the torture and deaths of 2 innocent children. John de Blase also remains on death row, awaiting execution. Chase and Natalie de Blase were laid to rest after their remains were recovered. Their graves have become symbols of innocence lost and a reminder of what happens when no one intervenes in time. The case shocked Alabama and raised painful questions about child welfare, unnoticed warning signs, and how abuse can hide behind closed doors. The children's mother has since become an advocate for child protection, speaking publicly about the signs she missed and the system that failed her babies. To this day, the story of Chase and Natalie serves as a devastating reminder that home should be the safest place for a child, but for some, it becomes the most dangerous. Number 3, Laura Day. She had already killed once before, her ex-boyfriend in the 1980s, a crime she claimed was self-defense. In 2012, she would kill again. This time, the victim was a 6-year-old boy who called her mom. Taylor Searing was a bright, energetic 6-year-old who loved the beach, riding his scooter, and playing with toy cars. He lived with his father, David Searing, in Corpus Christi, Texas, in a modest apartment on Ocean Drive, just blocks from the Gulf Coast. Taylor's parents were divorced, and his mother lived elsewhere, which meant David was Taylor's primary caregiver. David worked long hours at the port to provide for his son. Taylor was the center of his world, a happy child with a bright future. In early 2012, David met Laura Day through mutual friends. Laura presented herself as calm, spiritual, and reformed, a woman who had made mistakes in her past but had learned from them. She was charming, perhaps too charming. Within weeks of meeting David, Laura moved into the Ocean Drive apartment, promising to help care for Taylor while David worked. At first, it seemed like a good arrangement. Laura appeared attentive. Taylor seemed happy enough. But David didn't know the truth about Laura's past, the conviction, the violence, the darkness she carried. Friends and family later said they noticed Laura was overly controlling. She inserted herself into every aspect of Taylor's life and made decisions without consulting David. She became possessive of David's time and resentful when Taylor demanded his father's attention. But David, eager to provide stability for his son, overlooked the warning signs. On October 12, 2012, everything changed. Laura picked Taylor up from school while David was at work. She later claimed that Taylor asked to go swimming at the beach, so she took him to the coast near their apartment. According to Laura, Taylor was playing in shallow water when he suddenly collapsed. She said she pulled him from the water and drove him to a random house nearby instead of calling 911. Then, she drove to Christus Spohn Hospital Corpus Christi Shoreline on Elizabeth Street. When they arrived at the emergency room around 3:47 p.m., Taylor was unresponsive. Despite the medical team's resuscitation efforts, Taylor was pronounced dead. But almost immediately, doctors and nurses were suspicious. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, the attending physician, later testified that nothing about Taylor's condition matched a drowning. His body was completely dry. His hair wasn't wet. His clothes showed no signs of water. There was no sand in his lungs, no water in his stomach. It didn't make sense, Dr. Hernandez said. If he drowned, where was the water? Police were called to the hospital. When they questioned Laura, her story began to change. First, she said Taylor collapsed in the water. Then she said he was coughing. Then she said she tried to help him but panicked. Investigators grew suspicious and launched a full investigation. They discovered that Laura had never actually taken Taylor to the beach that day. Security footage from a neighbor's doorbell camera showed Laura's car never left the apartment complex during the time she claimed they were at the coast. Detectives also uncovered disturbing internet searches on Laura's computer from the days leading up to Taylor's death. She had searched for terms like life insurance, how to revive someone, and child custody. The medical examiner's autopsy revealed that Taylor died from asphyxiation, not drowning. There were signs of trauma inconsistent with an accident. Investigators believed Laura had caused Taylor's death and then fabricated the drowning story to cover her tracks. In a letter Laura later wrote to David, she made a chilling admission. She claimed Taylor had been coughing up water after the alleged beach trip. Instead of taking him to the hospital, she said she gave him a warm bath and bounced him on her knee, hoping he would recover on his own. The letter wasn't an apology, it was a justification, an attempt to explain away her actions. Prosecutors called it a confession. In February 2013, Laura Day stood trial in Courtroom 3 of the Nueces County Courthouse on Leopard Street in Corpus Christi. Prosecutors presented a devastating case. They showed the jury the doorbell camera footage proving Laura never went to the beach. They presented the medical examiner's findings. They showed the internet searches. They introduced the letter. David Searing testified against Laura, saying he had trusted her with his son's life and she had destroyed it. "She took everything from me," he said, breaking down on the stand. The jury deliberated for just 2 hours. On February 20, 2013, they returned a guilty verdict on charges of capital murder of a child under 10. Laura Day showed no visible reaction as the verdict was read. On March 15, 2013, the judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole, the maximum sentence under Texas law. Today, Laura Day is inmate number 1847293 at the Mountain View Unit in Gatesville, Texas, a maximum security women's prison located about 200 miles north of Corpus Christi. She maintains her innocence, continuing to claim that Taylor's death was a tragic accident and that she panicked. But the courts, the jury, and the evidence tell a different story. She will spend the rest of her life behind bars. Taylor Searing is buried at Memory Gardens Cemetery in Corpus Christi. His gravestone reads, "Gone too soon, loved forever." His mother and father both visit regularly, bringing toy cars and flowers. The case led to increased scrutiny of how quickly romantic partners are introduced into children's lives and the importance of background checks. David Searing has since spoken publicly about the guilt he carries for not discovering Laura's violent past before allowing her into his son's life. To this day, Taylor's story is a heartbreaking reminder that trust, when misplaced, can cost a child everything. Number 4, Tiffany Moss. When firefighters responded to reports of a fire at an apartment complex in Gwinnett County, Georgia, on October 28, 2013, they discovered something far worse than flames. Inside a burned trash can was the body of 10-year-old Imani Moss, starved, tortured, and discarded like garbage. Imani Moss was born in 2003 in Georgia to a man Moss and his girlfriend. Her early life was unstable, her mother lost custody due to her own issues, and Imani was placed in the care of her father, Eman. When Eman met Tiffany Moss, they quickly became involved, and soon after, they married. Tiffany moved into the role of stepmother, and at first, people assumed she would care for Imani. That assumption was tragically wrong. From the beginning, Tiffany treated Imani differently than her own biological children. While Tiffany and Eman's biological kids ate regular meals and had toys, Imani was isolated and neglected. Teachers and neighbors began to notice that Imani looked increasingly thin and withdrawn. She wore dirty clothes to school. She had unexplained bruises. She asked teachers for extra food, saying she was hungry at home. In 2010, Tiffany was actually charged with child cruelty after Imani showed up at school with a severe burn from a hot pan. Tiffany received probation, not jail time. Shockingly, Child Protective Services returned Imani to the home shortly after, a decision that would later be heavily criticized. After that incident, things only got worse. Tiffany began homeschooling Imani in 2013, which effectively meant isolating her from any adults who could notice the abuse. By the fall of 2013, Imani was being systematically starved. Court records revealed that Tiffany locked Imani in her bedroom for extended periods, denied her food, and gave her only minimal water. While Tiffany and Eman fed their biological children full meals, Imani was left to waste away. At the time of her death, the 10-year-old weighed just 32 pounds, the average weight of a healthy 4-year-old child. Prosecutors later presented evidence showing that Imani had been confined to her room, isolated from her siblings, and treated as a burden rather than a child in need of love and care. Tiffany controlled the household, and a man, though aware of the abuse, did nothing to stop it. In fact, he participated. On October 28, 2013, a man Moss made a desperate 911 call. He told dispatchers his daughter was dead. When officers arrived at the apartment in Gwinnett County, they were met with a horrifying scene. Imani's body had been placed inside a trash can, doused with chemicals, and set on fire in an attempt to destroy the evidence. The medical examiner later ruled the cause of death as starvation combined with severe neglect. Investigators were sickened by what they found. They discovered almost no food in the home designated for Imani, while the rest of the family had full pantries. Imani's room had no toys, barely any bedding, and showed signs that she had been left alone for long stretches of time. During police interviews, a man eventually admitted that he and Tiffany had failed to feed Imani and that Tiffany was the driving force behind the starvation. He said Tiffany controlled the household and enforced the punishments. Eman Moss took a plea deal and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. He testified against Tiffany, admitting his role but making clear that Tiffany orchestrated the abuse. Tiffany, however, chose a different path. In a rare and shocking decision, she chose to represent herself during her 2019 trial. The trial, held at the Gwinnett County Courthouse, was extraordinary. Tiffany Moss, acting as her own attorney, asked almost no meaningful questions, presented no real defense, and showed no remorse. Prosecutors presented journal entries, medical records, and photographs showing Imani's extreme weight loss and the conditions of her confinement. Jurors saw images of Imani's skeletal frame. They heard testimony from teachers who remembered Imani as polite, quiet, and desperately hungry, a child who asked for extra food and said she didn't eat at home. The evidence was overwhelming. On April 30, 2019, the jury found Tiffany Moss guilty of murder, cruelty to children in the first degree, and concealing a death. On May 1, 2019, the same jury recommended the death penalty. Judge George Hutchinson sentenced Tiffany Moss to death, making her the only woman currently on Georgia's death row and one of only a handful of women in the United States facing execution for crimes against children. During sentencing, Judge Hutchinson addressed Tiffany directly. "You carried out a campaign of cruelty, both physical and psychological. You made Imani's last weeks on this earth a living hell." Tiffany showed no visible emotion. Today, Tiffany Moss is held at the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison in Jackson, Georgia, in solitary confinement on death row. Eman Moss is serving life without parole at a separate facility. Imani Moss was buried in a small cemetery in Georgia. At her funeral, a pastor said she had been failed by the very people who should have loved her most. The case forced Georgia officials to review how child abuse cases are handled and why repeated warnings were ignored. Imani's story is one of the most tragic child abuse cases in Georgia history. A little girl who loved school and dreamed of becoming a teacher was starved to death by the people who were supposed to protect her. Her memory serves as a call to action, a reminder that silence kills, and that every child deserves to be seen, heard, and saved. To this day, advocates continue to push for stronger oversight and faster intervention when children show signs of abuse. Number 5, Monique Osuna. The nanny cam footage would shock even veteran investigators. 20 hours of exercise. A 9-year-old boy forced to do jumping jacks until he collapsed. A stepmother who treated punishment like a full-time job. Emric Osuna was adopted as a toddler by his father, Eric Osuna, and his stepmother, Monique, when the family lived in California. To the outside world, they appeared to be a typical blended family. Emric was a quiet, gentle child who loved drawing and playing with toy cars. But behind the closed doors of the family home, Emric was being treated very differently from Monique and Eric's biological children. He was given fewer privileges, subjected to harsher discipline, and slowly isolated from the outside world. In early 2020, the Osuna family moved to Meridian, Idaho, settling into a house in a quiet subdivision. Neighbors rarely saw Emric. He had been pulled out of school and was being homeschooled, which meant he disappeared from public view entirely. While other children in the neighborhood played outside, rode bikes, and attended school, Emric spent most of his time confined indoors, hungry, exhausted, and terrified. What we know about Emric's final months comes largely from the family's own nanny cam footage, which prosecutors later presented in court. The recordings were meant to monitor the children, but instead, they captured months of systematic torture. The footage showed Monique forcing Emric to exercise for up to 20 hours a day. Jumping jacks, wall sits, planks, push-ups. The boy would collapse from exhaustion, and Monique would force him to continue. When he couldn't go on, she beat him with household objects, a frying pan, a belt, a wooden spoon. The nanny cam also captured Monique withholding food from Emmerich for days at a time. When she did feed him, it was meager: rice, a piece of bread, scraps. Meanwhile, the other children in the home ate regular meals. Investigators later described the footage as some of the most disturbing evidence they had ever seen. One detective said, "It was relentless. There was no mercy. She treated him like he wasn't even human." In the final months of his life, Emmerich's body began to shut down. His weight dropped to just 41 pounds, the average weight of a 5-year-old, not a 9-year-old boy. His ribs and spine were visible through his skin. Despite his frail condition, Monique continued the abuse. Eric, the boy's father, witnessed much of this but did nothing to stop it. In some instances, he participated. On September 1, 2020, around midnight, Monique noticed that Emmerich was unresponsive in his room. Instead of calling 911 immediately, she and Eric waited over an hour before seeking help. By the time paramedics arrived at the Meridian home, Emmerich was cold, covered in bruises, and no longer breathing. He was pronounced dead at a local hospital. The medical examiner's report was devastating: severe malnutrition, extensive bruising, muscle loss, and signs of prolonged physical trauma. The cause of death was listed as starvation and abuse. Detectives with the Meridian Police Department quickly saw the signs of long-term abuse. They seized the nanny cam recordings and were horrified by what they found. The footage showed months of ongoing torture, exercise routines that lasted all day, beatings when Emmerich couldn't continue, and a child slowly dying while his parents watched. Monique and Eric Osuna were arrested and charged with first-degree murder. During court proceedings, Monique's defense team tried to claim she was overwhelmed, depressed, and struggling mentally. Prosecutors rejected that narrative entirely. She was in full control, the lead prosecutor argued. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she showed no remorse, no empathy, no humanity. Eric Osuna admitted that he witnessed the abuse and failed to protect his son. He also admitted to participating at times. In February 2022, Monique Osuna pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and torture in Ada County Court in Boise, Idaho. The plea deal allowed her to avoid the death penalty, but the judge made it clear she would never see freedom again. At her sentencing hearing, Judge Stephen Hippler called Monique's actions sadistic, evil, and heartless. He sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Eric Osuna was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 40 years for his role in the abuse and his failure to protect Emmerich. In his remarks, Judge Hippler emphasized that Emmerich had no escape. No teacher saw him. No doctor examined him. No social worker checked on him. The home became a prison, and the abuse was relentless. The case led to public outrage across Idaho and calls for better oversight of homeschooling and child welfare. Today, Monique Osuna is serving her life sentence at the Pocatello Women's Correctional Center in Pocatello, Idaho. She is considered one of the most notoriously cruel offenders in Idaho's history. Eric Osuna is incarcerated separately. Emmerich Osuna was remembered by those who knew him as a quiet boy who loved to draw and play with toy cars. He was buried in a small ceremony, and his brief life has since become a rallying cry for child advocates pushing for stronger protections and faster intervention when children are isolated from society. The story of Emmerich is not just about what happened, it's about the importance of visibility. When children disappear from schools, from neighborhoods, from the eyes of caring adults, abuse can escalate unchecked. His case stands as a stark reminder that homeschooling without oversight can become a cover for unspeakable cruelty, and that every child deserves to be seen. Number 6. Laura Ramirez. 3-year-old Bella Citawayst didn't die from a fall or an accident. She died from blunt force trauma so severe that doctors knew instantly, someone had hurt this child on purpose. Bella Citawayst was born in 2017 in Pennsylvania. Her parents were separated, and she split time between her mother's home and her father's home in Lancaster County. Bella was a bright, curious toddler who loved to color, play dress-up, and watch cartoons. She had big brown eyes and an infectious laugh. When Bella's father, Mauricio Citawayst, began dating Laura Ramirez, Bella started spending more time at his house. At first, Laura seemed like just another adult in Bella's life, a strict caretaker, but nothing alarming. Over time, however, family members began to notice changes. Bella started coming home from her father's house with bruises. Her mother noticed scratches on her arms and legs. Once, Bella came home with a swollen lip. When asked what happened, Bella would say she fell or bumped into something. Laura always had an explanation ready. Bella was clumsy, she ran into things, she fell off the couch. Bella's mother grew increasingly uneasy, but without concrete proof of abuse, she felt powerless. By early 2020, Bella's biological mother noticed that Bella seemed more withdrawn and fearful. She didn't want to go to her father's house. She cried when it was time to leave. But the custody arrangement required it, and Bella continued to spend time in the home where Laura Ramirez lived. Behind closed doors, Laura's discipline had turned into outright cruelty. Court testimony later revealed that Bella was subjected to harsh punishments for minor infractions. If she didn't eat her food fast enough, she was yelled at. If she wet herself, she was forced to stand in the corner for extended periods. If she cried, she was told to be quiet or face consequences. The punishments escalated. What started as yelling turned into slapping. What started as timeouts turned into physical violence. On September 13, 2020, a 911 call was made from the CHYST Ramirez residence in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Bella was unresponsive. When first responders arrived, they found Bella unconscious with visible bruising across her small body. She was rushed to Penn State Hershey Medical Center and placed on life support, but she never regained consciousness. On September 14, 2020, Bella was pronounced dead. The autopsy results were devastating. Bella had internal bleeding, bruises in various stages of healing, and injuries consistent with blunt force trauma. The medical examiner ruled her death a homicide. The injuries were too severe, too widespread, and too specific to be accidental. When police questioned Laura Ramirez, her story kept changing. First, she said Bella had fallen down the stairs. Then she claimed Bella slipped in the bathtub. Investigators didn't believe either version. The injuries simply didn't match. As the investigation continued, authorities uncovered a pattern of escalating abuse. Prosecutors presented evidence that Bella had been slammed into walls, struck repeatedly in the abdomen, and subjected to violent outbursts disguised as discipline. Witnesses testified that Laura had a short temper and that Bella had been visibly afraid of her in the weeks before her death. The court also heard that Bella had been forced to stand for long periods as punishment and was sometimes denied food when she misbehaved. Bella's father, Mauricio CHYST, claimed he was at work during most of the abuse and said he didn't know how severe it had become. Prosecutors, however, argued that he had ignored obvious warning signs. He saw the bruises. He heard Laura yelling. He knew Bella was afraid. Yet he did nothing to protect his daughter. Laura Ramirez was arrested and charged with criminal homicide, aggravated assault, child endangerment, and tampering with evidence. Mauricio was also charged with child endangerment for his failure to intervene. During court hearings at the Lancaster County Courthouse, prosecutors painted Laura as a woman who lost control and took her anger out on a defenseless toddler. They described how she showed little emotion when Bella was on life support at the hospital. One nurse testified that Laura didn't shed a single tear while Bella lay dying, while Bella's biological mother collapsed in grief. In January 2022, Laura Ramirez was convicted of first-degree murder in Lancaster County Court. The jury found that her actions were intentional and that Bella's death was the result of prolonged, deliberate abuse, not a moment of anger or an accident. On February 10, 2022, the judge sentenced Laura to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In his sentencing remarks, the judge called Bella's death the result of sustained, intentional cruelty, and said Laura had shown a complete disregard for the life of a child in her care. Mauricio CHYST later pleaded no contest to child endangerment charges. He was sentenced to prison time as well, though he was not charged with murder. Prosecutors made it clear that while Laura was the one who inflicted the fatal injuries, Mauricio had failed in his most basic duty, to protect his daughter. After the trial, Bella's mother spoke publicly. She said Bella was kind, loving, and full of life. She trusted the wrong people, she said, and they failed her in the worst way possible. Vigils were held in Bella's memory. Pink balloons, Bella's favorite color, were released into the sky. Community members gathered to honor a little girl whose life was stolen far too soon. Today, Laura Ramirez is serving life without parole at a Pennsylvania state prison. She has never taken responsibility for what she did. Bella CHYST's death became a rallying point for advocates calling for stronger oversight in custody cases and better training for recognizing signs of abuse. The case also pushed Pennsylvania lawmakers to examine how abuse reports are handled, especially when children show repeated injuries. Bella was only 3 years old when she died. Her story is a painful reminder that every suspicion of abuse should be taken seriously, that every bruise deserves an explanation, and that silence can cost a child their life. To this day, Bella's memory serves as a call to action for anyone who sees a child in danger. Speak up, act fast, and never assume someone else will intervene. Number 7. Letitia Storch. When a suitcase containing human remains was discovered under a bridge in Pace, Florida, over 1,300 miles from Colorado, investigators knew they had found 11-year-old Gannon Storch. He had been stabbed 18 times, shot once, and beaten. His stepmother had made sure of that. Gannon Storch was born in 2008 in South Carolina. He was an energetic, kind boy who loved video games, playing outside, and spending time with his younger sister. His father, Albert Storch, served in the military, and his biological mother, Landon Hyatt, remained close to her children even after the divorce. In 2015, Albert remarried. His new wife, Letitia, became Gannon's stepmother. On social media, Letitia presented herself as a loving, involved parent. But friends and family members later said she was controlling, jealous of the attention Albert gave his children, and quick to anger. In January 2020, the Storch family was living in a quiet neighborhood in El Paso County, Colorado, in a house on Mandan Drive in the Lawson Ranch subdivision. To neighbors, they seemed like a typical blended family. But on January 27, 2020, everything changed. That afternoon, Letitia called police to report that Gannon had gone to a friend's house and never returned. She claimed he left the home between 3 p.m. and 4 p.m. She sounded emotional and concerned. But investigators quickly found problems with her story. Security cameras in the neighborhood showed Gannon getting into Letitia's truck that morning and leaving the house with her. However, the footage showed that Gannon never returned home. Letitia claimed he came back later and then disappeared again, but the video evidence proved otherwise. Gannon was seen getting into the truck in the morning. He was never seen getting out. Detectives grew suspicious. They searched the Storch family home on Mandan Drive and found bloodstains in Gannon's bedroom, on the carpet, on the mattress, and on the walls. They also found blood evidence in the garage. As pressure from investigators increased, Letitia's story began to change. First, she said Gannon was abducted. Then she claimed a man had raped her and taken Gannon. None of her stories matched the physical evidence or the timeline. Phone records and internet searches told a different story. Investigators discovered that Letitia had made disturbing searches before and after Gannon's disappearance, including phrases like "I'm over it," "find me a new life," and "can you get away with murder if there is no body?" She had also rented a car and driven hundreds of miles while Gannon was still officially listed as missing. 2 months later, on March 17, 2020, a suitcase was discovered under a bridge near Pace, Florida, more than 1,300 miles from Colorado. Inside were human remains. DNA testing confirmed it was Gannon Storch. He had been stabbed 18 times, shot once in the head, and struck with a blunt object. His body had been stuffed into a suitcase and dumped in a remote location in an attempt to hide the crime forever. Letitia Storch had been arrested on March 2, 2020, before Gannon's body was even found, and charged with first-degree murder, child abuse resulting in death, tampering with a deceased body, and tampering with evidence. Investigators had built a case based on the blood evidence, the security footage, her changing stories, and her suspicious internet searches. The trial began in 2023 and lasted 6 weeks. It became one of the most closely watched cases in Colorado history. Prosecutors argued that Letitia murdered Gannon inside the family home on January 27, 2020. They presented evidence showing that blood had soaked through Gannon's mattress and into the floorboards, proving he had been killed in his own bedroom. They showed the jury the security footage. They presented her internet searches. They detailed her attempts to cover up the crime, including moving Gannon's body from Colorado to Florida in the rented car. Letitia's defense team tried to claim she suffered from dissociative identity disorder and that she was not in control of her actions during the murder. Psychiatric evaluations were conducted, but experts determined that Letitia knew what she was doing. The crime was calculated, not impulsive. She had planned a cover-up. She had disposed of the body. She had lied repeatedly to investigators, to Gannon's father, and to the public. Albert Storch testified during the trial. He spoke about his son's love for video games and Nerf guns, his kindness, and his gentle nature. He confronted Letitia directly in court, his voice breaking with emotion. Gannon's mother, Landon Hyatt, also testified. "He was my hero," she said through tears. "He deserved so much more than this." On May 8, 2023, after weeks of testimony and evidence, the jury found Letitia Storch guilty on all counts. She showed little emotion as the verdict was read. The judge called the murder cruel, calculated, and depraved. On May 19, 2023, Letitia was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 156 years for the other charges. Today, Letitia Storch is incarcerated at the Denver Women's Correctional Facility in Denver, Colorado. She will never be released. Albert Storch has since spoken about the guilt he carries for not seeing the danger his son was in. Gannon's biological mother has become an advocate for child protection and speaks publicly about recognizing warning signs of abuse in blended families. Gannon Storch was remembered at his funeral as a kind, gentle boy who loved his family and his little sister. Donations were made in his name to organizations fighting child abuse. His case became a symbol of how trusted caregivers can become the most dangerous people in a child's life. The lies, the planning, and the cruelty displayed by Letitia Storch shocked the nation and served as a grim reminder that evil can wear the mask of a loving parent. To this day, Gannon's story is told as a warning: pay attention to the children in your life, trust your instincts when something feels wrong, and never assume that a stepmother's love is guaranteed. Gannon Storch deserved protection. Instead, he got betrayal. And the woman who should have cared for him became the one who ended his life. Number 8, Angela Paulina. By the time paramedics arrived at the Long Island home on January 17, 2020, 8-year-old Thomas Valver was already frozen solid. His body temperature was so low that first responders knew immediately this was no accident. Thomas Valver was a sweet, gentle boy with autism. He needed patience, understanding, and care. Instead, after his parents separated, he was sent to live with his father, Michael Valver, a New York police officer, and Michael's fiancée, Angela Paulina. The home they shared in Center Mauritius, Long Island, should have been a place of safety. Instead, it became a house of horrors. Thomas had 2 brothers, and all 3 boys lived with Michael and Angela. Angela had 3 daughters from a previous relationship who also lived in the home. But the way Angela treated the boys versus her own daughters was starkly different. Court testimony and evidence later revealed that Thomas and his brothers were subjected to brutal treatment, while Angela's daughters lived comfortably upstairs. Angela was not a passive bystander. Testimony showed that she installed surveillance cameras throughout the home, not to protect the children, but to monitor them and enforce harsh punishments. Text messages between Angela and Michael revealed her cruelty. She regularly referred to Thomas as dead weight, and complained that he wasn't worth the effort. She texted Michael instructions on how to punish the boys, ordering him to lock them in the garage for longer periods and to deny them food. Beginning in 2017, the abuse escalated into something systematic and deadly. Thomas and his brothers were denied food regularly. They were forced to sleep in an unheated garage with no blankets, no coats, and no bedding, even in the middle of winter. Meanwhile, Angela's daughters slept in warm, comfortable bedrooms upstairs with plenty of food and privileges. The temperature in the garage often dropped below freezing during the winter months, and the boys were left there overnight, shivering and begging to be let inside. On the night of January 16, 2020, the temperature outside dropped to around 19 degrees Fahrenheit. Angela and Michael forced Thomas and his brother Anthony into the garage once again. No heat. No blankets. No warm clothes. Security footage later recovered from the home showed the boys shivering, crying, and begging to be let inside. Audio from the cameras captured Thomas saying, "Please, I'm freezing." Angela and Michael ignored him. By the morning of January 17, 2020, Thomas was unconscious. His body was stiff from hypothermia. Instead of calling 911 immediately, Angela and Michael spent precious time trying to stage the scene. They poured water on Thomas to make it look like he had slipped on ice outside. They then called 911, claiming Thomas had fallen in the driveway. When paramedics arrived, they found Thomas frozen, bruised, and with an extremely low body temperature. He was rushed to Long Island Community Hospital, where doctors worked to revive him. But it was too late. Thomas was pronounced dead. The medical examiner confirmed the cause of death: hypothermia due to prolonged exposure to freezing temperatures. The responding officers and paramedics were immediately suspicious. Thomas's body didn't match the story Angela and Michael were telling. Police launched a full investigation and quickly discovered the surveillance footage from inside the home. What they saw was horrifying. Hours of video showed the boys shivering in the freezing garage, crying for help, and being ignored. Audio recordings captured Angela mocking the boys and yelling at them when they begged to come inside. Investigators also found text messages between Angela and Michael that showed premeditation and intent. In one message, Angela complained about cleaning up after the boys and told Michael to just leave them in the garage. In another, she wrote that she was sick of them and wanted them gone. The evidence was overwhelming. This was not an accident. This was murder. Michael Valver was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. In 2022, he was convicted and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Angela Paulina's trial began in early 2023. Prosecutors made it clear that Angela was not just aware of the abuse, she helped create it, enforce it, and escalate it. She was an active participant in the torture of two autistic children who needed love and care but received only cruelty. During the trial, jurors watched the surveillance footage. They heard the audio recordings. They read the text messages. The evidence painted a picture of a woman who viewed Thomas and his brothers as burdens and chose to punish them instead of caring for them. The prosecution argued that Angela's actions were deliberate, calculated, and cruel. On March 21, 2023, Angela Paulina was found guilty of second-degree murder and multiple counts of child endangerment. Days later, she was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison, the maximum sentence allowed under New York law. At her sentencing, Thomas's biological mother, Justina Zubkovalva, addressed the court. "You took my baby's last breath," she said, staring at Angela. "You took his warmth, his smile, his chance to grow up. I hope you never see freedom again." Today, Angela Paulina is serving her sentence at the Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for Women in Bedford Hills, New York. Michael Valva is incarcerated separately. Thomas Valva is buried at a cemetery on Long Island. His grave is often covered in flowers, toys, and handwritten messages from people who never met him but were heartbroken by his story. The case sparked outrage across New York and led to investigations into the Child Protective Services system, which had been warned multiple times about the abuse in the Valva household but failed to act. Thomas's mother had repeatedly tried to regain custody, citing concerns about the boy's treatment, but her warnings were not taken seriously. The system failed Thomas, and he paid with his life. Thomas's story has since become a rallying cry for reform. Advocates have pushed for stronger protections for children with disabilities, better oversight of custody arrangements, and faster intervention when abuse is reported. His death also highlighted the dangers of allowing surveillance to be used as a tool of control rather than protection. To this day, Thomas Valva is remembered as a loving boy who liked to draw, play with toy cars, and hug his mother. His life was stolen by two people who should have protected him. His legacy is a call to action. Believe children when they say they are cold, they are hungry, they are scared. Don't wait. Act. Because for Thomas, help came too late. Number 9, Emma Tustin. When paramedics arrived at the home in Solihull, England, on June 16, 2020, they found 6-year-old Arthur Labinjo Hughes barely conscious, covered in bruises, and weighing just 41 pounds. Audio recordings from inside the home would later reveal his final words, "No one loves me." Arthur Labinjo Hughes was born in 2014 in Birmingham, United Kingdom. He was a bright, smiling boy who loved superheroes, football, and spending time with his grandparents. His early life was difficult. His parents separated after a violent incident involving his mother, and Arthur was placed in the custody of his father, Thomas Hughes. In 2019, Thomas began a relationship with Emma Tustin, and soon after, Arthur moved into Emma's home in Solihull. At first, neighbors thought Emma was simply a strict stepmother. But inside the house, Arthur's life was deteriorating rapidly. Emma and Thomas began punishing Arthur for the smallest infractions. They stopped hugging him. They told family members he was lying and misbehaving. Soon, Arthur was being forced to stand alone for hours each day, facing a wall. He was made to sleep on the floor. His toys were taken away. His food was reduced to scraps of bread or nothing at all. By the spring of 2020, as the COVID-19 lockdown began in the UK, Arthur was completely cut off from the outside world. No school. No friends. No relatives visiting. Emma and Thomas had complete control over him, and they used it to torture him. Court evidence later showed that Arthur was forced to stand for up to 14 hours a day as punishment. If he moved or sat down, he was beaten or poisoned with salt. The most chilling evidence came from audio recordings made by Emma herself. She had installed cameras and recording devices throughout the home, ostensibly for security, but the recordings captured something far more sinister. In the audio clips, Arthur could be heard crying weakly, saying, "No one loves me, and I want to go to my nanny's house." Emma could be heard responding with mockery and cruelty, telling him to be quiet or face worse punishment. Arthur's physical condition deteriorated rapidly. He lost significant weight. Bruises appeared all over his body, on his back, his arms, his head, his legs. He was denied water for long periods, which caused severe dehydration. Meanwhile, Emma and Thomas ate full meals in front of him, taunting him with food he wasn't allowed to have. On June 16, 2020, Arthur collapsed in the hallway of the Solihull home. Emma called emergency services, claiming Arthur had hit his head after falling. But when paramedics and doctors examined Arthur at Birmingham Children's Hospital, they immediately saw signs of long-term abuse and neglect. Arthur had a catastrophic brain injury consistent with being violently shaken or struck. He was severely malnourished and weighed just 41 pounds. His salt levels were dangerously high, suggesting he had been force-fed salt, a form of poisoning. Arthur never regained consciousness. He died on June 17, 2020. Doctors determined that the brain injury was unsurvivable and that Arthur had been subjected to a campaign of cruelty. The medical evidence showed that he had been systematically abused for months. Police arrested both Emma Tustin and Thomas Hughes. During interviews, Emma claimed Arthur had injured himself by banging his own head against the wall. The evidence, however, told a very different story. Investigators found the audio recordings, surveillance footage from inside the home, and medical records proving prolonged abuse. The trial began in November 2021 at Coventry Crown Court. Prosecutors presented months of evidence showing systematic torture. They played the audio recordings where Arthur begged for love and food. Jurors listened in horrified silence, many wiping tears from their eyes. The prosecution presented photographs showing Arthur's extreme weight loss, his bruises, and the barren conditions of his room. His room had no toys, barely any bedding, and showed clear signs that he had been isolated and neglected for long periods. Teachers from Arthur's previous school testified that they remembered him as a polite, cheerful boy who always said please and thank you. They said he loved playing football and talked about wanting to be like his dad when he grew up. The contrast between the happy child they remembered and the tortured boy in the recordings was devastating. Emma Tustin was charged with murder and multiple counts of child cruelty. Thomas Hughes was charged with manslaughter for encouraging and allowing the abuse. Prosecutors argued that while Thomas had not been the primary aggressor, he had sent Emma text messages instructing her on how to punish Arthur and had never intervened to protect his son. In one message, Thomas texted Emma, "Just end him." Emma replied with laughing emojis. On December 2, 2021, the jury returned their verdicts. Emma Tustin was found guilty of murder. Thomas Hughes was found guilty of manslaughter. During sentencing, the judge addressed Emma directly, "You carried out a campaign of cruelty, both physical and psychological. You made Arthur's last weeks on this earth a living hell. You are a manipulative woman who will only tell the truth when it suits your own purposes." On December 3, 2021, Emma Tustin was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 29 years before she can be considered for parole. Thomas Hughes was sentenced to 21 years in prison. The sentences sparked public outrage across the United Kingdom. Thousands of people held vigils for Arthur. His photographs, showing him smiling in a tiny football kit, became the face of a national conversation about child abuse, lockdown isolation, and systemic failures. Today, Emma Tustin is incarcerated at HMP Peterborough, a high-security women's prison in England. She is considered one of the most hated women in the UK and has reportedly been attacked by other inmates. Thomas Hughes is serving his sentence at a separate facility. Arthur Labinger Hughes is buried in a cemetery in the West Midlands. His grandmother has built a memorial garden in his honour, and football clubs across England have held tribute matches in his name. The case led to a national inquiry into how Arthur's abuse went unnoticed and unreported during the COVID-19 lockdown. Social workers, teachers, and family members all missed opportunities to save him. The UK government launched reviews of child protection procedures and vowed to improve systems for detecting abuse when children are isolated from society. Arthur's story is one of the most heartbreaking cases in recent UK history. A little boy who loved football, superheroes, and his grandparents was tortured to death by the very people meant to love him. His final words, "No one loves me," haunt everyone who hears them. To this day, Arthur's legacy is a call to action. See the children around you, listen to them, and act when something feels wrong. Because in Arthur's case, no one acted in time, and a beautiful boy lost his life. Number 10, Bainash Batul. When police entered the family home in Woking, Surrey, England, on August 10, 2023, they found 10-year-old Saar Sharif lying alone in a bedroom, dressed carefully as if someone had tried to make her look peaceful. She had been dead for hours. Her father, stepmother, and uncle had already fled the country. Saar Sharif was born in 2012 in Surrey, England. She was described by those who knew her as a quiet, artistic, and sensitive child who loved to draw and write stories. Her parents, Irfan Sharif and Olga Sharif, divorced in 2017. At first, Saar lived mostly with her mother, but by 2022, custody was transferred to her father, Irfan. Saar then moved into a house in Woking with her father, his partner Bainash Batul, her uncle Faisal Malik, and several other siblings. Behind closed doors, Sa's life began to deteriorate. Prosecutors later said that Sa was isolated from the outside world, bullied within the home, and subjected to escalating physical abuse. Neighbors rarely saw Sa. She had been pulled out of school and was being homeschooled, which meant she disappeared from the view of teachers and other adults who might have noticed the warning signs. Throughout 2023, Sa's condition worsened. She stopped being seen in the neighborhood. When she did appear, she looked withdrawn and sad. Neighbors later said they occasionally heard shouting from the house, but nothing was ever officially reported. The abuse was happening in complete secrecy, behind the closed doors of the Woking home. On August 10, 2023, at 2:47 a.m., Irfan Sharif called emergency services from Pakistan, not from the UK. He told the operator that they would find Sa's body at the family home in Woking. Police immediately went to the address and found Sa lying in a bedroom, alone. She had been dead for several hours. Her body showed extensive injuries, more than 20 wounds, both healed and fresh. The pathologist who examined Sa's body said the injuries had been inflicted over a sustained period, likely spanning weeks or months. The cause of death was listed as multiple traumatic injuries. What made this case even more shocking was that the people responsible for Sa's death had already fled. Just hours before the 911 call, Irfan Sharif, Bainash Batul, Faisal Malik, and 5 other children had boarded a flight from London to Pakistan. They left Sa's body behind, alone in the house, and fled the country to avoid arrest. A global manhunt began. Sa's mother, Olga, was devastated and heartbroken. She said she had been banned from seeing Sa in the months leading up to her death and had tried repeatedly to gain access to her daughter. "I couldn't protect her," she said, "and I will live with that guilt for the rest of my life." 4 weeks, Bainash Batul, Irfan Sharif, and Faisal Malik hid in rural Pakistan, evading law enforcement. During this time, Bainash released a video statement to the media. In the brief clip, she didn't apologize for Sa's death or express remorse. Instead, she complained about how the media was portraying them and said, "We are willing to cooperate, but our side of the story is not being heard." The public found her statement cold, calculated, and deeply disturbing. On September 13, 2023, after a month on the run, Pakistani police arrested Bainash Batul, Irfan Sharif, and Faisal Malik near Islamabad. They were extradited to the United Kingdom and charged with murder and causing or allowing the death of a child. Upon their return, they were remanded into custody with no chance of bail. Prosecutors alleged that Sa suffered a prolonged campaign of abuse in the months leading up to her death. She had been beaten, isolated, and subjected to severe physical punishment. Medical reports presented to the court showed that Sa had injuries on her face, limbs, and torso. Some of the injuries were weeks old, showing that the abuse had been ongoing and systematic. In court, prosecutors argued that while Irfan may have inflicted some of the physical abuse, Bainash Batul allowed it to continue and actively participated in the emotional and physical cruelty. They accused her of creating a home environment filled with fear, silence, and violence. The prosecution stated that Sa had no way to escape, no teacher to confide in, no doctor to see her injuries, and no social worker checking on her welfare. As of the current proceedings, Bainash Batul has pleaded not guilty, and her trial is ongoing. However, she and Irfan Sharif remain in custody, facing life imprisonment if convicted. Under UK law, a murder conviction involving child abuse and cruelty typically carries a sentence of 30 years to life before parole eligibility. Prosecutors are expected to push for a whole life sentence given the severity of the abuse and the attempt to flee the country. Sa's funeral was held in Pakistan at her grandfather's request, but her mother Olga was not permitted to attend. She later held a private memorial in the United Kingdom, where friends, family, and community members gathered to remember Sa as a bright, creative girl who loved to draw and write stories. The case has forced the UK government to conduct yet another review of child protection systems, particularly around custody decisions, homeschooling oversight, and school absenteeism. Teachers and social workers had noticed that Sa was missing from school regularly, but no formal safeguarding investigation was launched. Advocates are now calling for mandatory wellness checks for children who are removed from school systems and stricter oversight of homeschooling arrangements. Today, Bainash Batul is being held at HMP Bronzefield, a women's prison in Surrey, as she awaits the conclusion of her trial. Irfan Sharif and Faisal Malik are being held separately. The other children who were in the home have been placed into protective care. Sa Sharif's story has become a rallying cry for child protection reform in the UK, highlighting how easily a child can disappear from public view and how critical it is for systems to actively monitor vulnerable children. Sarah's life was short, but her story will not be forgotten. She deserved protection, love, and safety. Instead, she was betrayed by the very people meant to care for her. Her death serves as a stark reminder that when children are isolated, whether through homeschooling, custody battles, or family secrecy, they become invisible. And when children become invisible, abuse can flourish unchecked. To this day, Sarah's case stands as a call to action. Every child deserves to be seen, heard, and protected. And when a child goes missing from the eyes of society, someone must ask why.